Edgar's words, closing my eyes in that dark space, seeing the killer's story come alive. I think it was his eyes. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Not exactly the bedtime story that my mother read to me when I was an infant, a time when she might have loved me. I took out a pad and pencil, and under the beam of my flashlight, drew sketches of Edgar's tales. Soon I was using my body as a canvas. Childish ink drawings ran up and down my arms. Later, I would properly puncture these images into my skin. Edgar made me think about the thin line between life and death. And so I began to write, stealing an empty notebook from some kid's desk, and dreamt of my own stories. I started with Edgar's words. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where one ends and where the other begins? Edgar understood with such clarity that each of us exists in the shadow, hovering between the tugs and pulls of life and death, the chaos that lies between the light and dark, the hope we cling to on one side and the terror that beckons us on the other. We live and suffer here, helpless against the buffeting winds of our existence that sweep us back and forth. I gave this place a name, Maddening. It was then, as that boy, I decided to become Poe, a fateful decision. Not that I had any real choice. I was barely visible at the children's home, a freak that other kids spitefully called me. They would never understand me or care to. Neither would my counselors or anyone else. Only my parents tolerated me. But that was earlier on. I guess they felt obliged. Though I saw the confusion in their squinting eyes, how they could have possibly brought this person into the world. It didn't matter anyway, since they were dead after the accident. Then I was taken away to live with these other kids with their own dead parents. It was here at this home where Edgar and I bonded, having even more in common than I thought at first. Edgar's father had abandoned him when he was 9 years old. Then his mother died a year later. Both of us were orphans of the world, and he understood me as he saw himself. There in his poetry, he spoke to me. From childhood's hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. Edgar, I saw your life suffering in the photographs, your eyes diverted from the camera lens as if something else was preying on your mind. The dark circles that sagged onto your sunken cheeks, signifying your inner despair. There's only unhappiness in the thin, crooked shape of your mouth. I know all about you. Your drunken binges and failed suicide attempts, your anguish built on the fear that you are alone in the world as you were as a child. Not even 3 years of age when your beautiful mother, Eliza, a star of the stage, dies at 24 from consumption, the dreaded tuberculosis that attacked her lungs. So cruel the coincidence when the disease takes your beloved wife, Virginia, also at 24. Next door is where she lived. Then the other woman, but you were rejected or bereaved by them all. So they are disguised in your stories and poetry. Annabelle Lee, Berenice, Madeline Usher, Rowena, Ligia. Yes, they all die on your pages and in your life. So lost are you in the death of a beautiful woman. To live in such darkness. They found you delirious, shabbily dressed, penniless, and lying in a gutter after a bender at the Gunner's Hall Tavern in Baltimore. You spent the next 4 days in a state of frightening hallucinations and incoherence. So ignominious. Your official death at the hospital, brain congestion, a stupid euphemism for drowning yourself in alcohol at 40 years of age. How you must have anticipated and feared these last tormented moments of your life, crying out your last mortal words, Lord, help my poor soul. Take solace, Edgar. You live in me. I am amazed how much I have transformed into you in my black wig and mustache, but I will never be able to inhabit your fictional world. That is where you are safely guarded, deeply ensconced inside your stories, hiding behind your dramatist personae from those malignant spirits. I don't begrudge you, yet I can't be satisfied just imagining your world. I need to feel more, to live inside of it, to be among people as an all-powerful manifestation of your subconscious. So I will write my stories. The world needs to know me for who I am, my purpose, my passion, my power. Someone whose mind works differently, like yours. We are the same. You, Edgar, and me, Poe. We both exist in the darkness. So that's it. Yeah, so it's a kind of a venture into the life of Poe. Plus other things, as a writer, you always kind of discover all these sidelights to. I know some of the poets were here earlier, and I thank you for sticking around for us.
Yes, that was great.
Yeah, thank you. I thank you. Roger, would you like to join, or just from there, or whatever you like?
Join from here. I don't want to move around too much.
Yeah.
Damage anything.
Yeah.
So what do you think has influenced Poe's life? In particular, his combative nature, his fondness for the bottle, and his quarrels with these other writers on his fiction. You have a very good range of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't necessarily beloved by other writers in his day. He was a very, very harsh critic. He writes a different genre.
The Tomahawk he was known as for his really critical book reviews.
Yeah, and so he wasn't Mr. Popularity for, and there's all sorts of there's a mystique about Poe that it's quite incredible when you really think about it. He passes, I think, in around 1849 or so. Yeah, and again, the last 3 years, as we mentioned, this was his home with his wife, Virginia, and Virginia very much, in fact, that you might want to peek in, that was her room, and where she suffered for quite a while with tuberculosis, and where she passed. So this is really something of an eeriness and that's very provocative here for me, at least, in terms of even reading these words.
She did die here, and unnaturally.
When you say unnaturally, what is that?
Of tuberculosis at a very young age.
Yeah, 24 years of age, right? By the way, as most of us know, some of the trivia points, he actually marries her, his cousin, at age 13. She's 13, and he's 24, so 26. And so kind of an unusual, I'll put it this way, an unusual personal relationship that he had with his cousin and his aunt, who he lived with as well. Was his aunt in this cottage as well?
His aunt, Mariah Clem, lived here in the cottage. From our descriptions of visitors and from Poe's writings himself, they were very poor. Poe pays $100 a year in rent to live here. And from our descriptions, Mariah Clem is the one that kept it looking very genteel and kept it looking nice.
Yeah.
And she leaves, and she was from Baltimore. And after he dies, she heads back to Baltimore, and they're all buried there together. And outside of Westminster Church.
Yeah, Poe travels around. He is, you know, his homes, he had various homes down in 84th Street. As you mentioned, there's actually a street that's named Poe. There's Poe Street or Poe.
Poe Place, maybe.
Poe Place.
Poe Place, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So my question is, was this house originally somewhere else?
Yes, it's right down 450 feet to the south and set to the southeast on Kingsbridge Road. And at the turn of the 20th century, they were widening Kingsbridge Road, and the cottage was scheduled to be destroyed. Two very important civic groups, the New York Shakespeare Society and the Bronx Society of the Arts and Sciences, along with Theodore Roosevelt, mobilized to save it. So in 1902, they created the park, so there would be a place for it. And in 1913, it's moved here. And in 1917, it's opened as a museum, the oldest pub museum in the United States.
Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering, what was your research process like for writing this book? Share some.
Very serendipitous. I'll put it that way. Again, I began this book really. Edgar Allan Poe wasn't in the original iteration of my thinking, at least, about this. And again, I don't know what conjured up Edgar Allan Poe. I can't tell you where that comes from. But once he was there, he kind of took over the creative process. And I started actually kind of going back, you know, what inspired him? You know, when you really think about it, I mean, his longevity is remarkable, right? I mean, how many writers, especially in that genre? I mean, he is seen as maybe the originator of the horror genre, as well as the modern day detective novel. I think some of you might know. He was really kind of a very innovative writer that wrote outside of the genre. He wrote about the cosmos. He wrote about adventures. It wasn't just this venture, this type of genre, I should say, and inspired other writers like Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes and the like. So he's a remarkable writer for his time. And again, he has 40 years on Earth, and he wrote very, very prolifically. So getting back to your question, you know, I started to dig deeper into his life, what inspired him. And again, writing is such a, you know, cliche is it's a journey, but I can't think of a better cliche, because you start to, what was his life like? So I mentioned in this book, in fact, there's a chapter devoted to something called technophobia. I don't know if any of you know what that is, and I certainly didn't. And what was it back in the 1800s? The fear of being buried alive. And that inspired so much of Poe's work, to say the least, right? And what was, it was a genuine fear. In fact, historic individuals took notice. For instance, it was George Washington. George Washington, who had his, I'm trying to get the story right. George Washington and Chopin wanted to make clear that they were dead before they were buried. I think it was Washington who had his heart cut out. And Chopin took other measures to make sure he was dead before they were buried. Because back then, you know, people suffered from diseases. They may have had shallow breathing. They may have been unconscious. Whatever the situation is, there was a fear of being buried alive, and they had a name for it called technophobia. So this is just one sidelight to this investigation having to do with Edgar Allan Poe. And do you still read Poe's work? I mean, he's such a commercial figure in a way, right? You kind of go online, there are a dozen book clubs and other areas where they pay homage to Mr. Poe. And there is a certain long life he has to his works, to his actual persona as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but you know, it kind of leaked into my subconscious and then leaked onto these pages. Yeah.
So I have a question. First one, the book is amazing. It's incredible.
I'll pay you afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
No, really. But I guess the question is, you know, like Mozart, that's a young,
was he considered famous when he was alive? And did he make any money when he was alive? Or was he like discovered after?
From my research, maybe Roger could even add to this, he was really one of the first writers to make a living off of writing, all right? And he was an editor, he was a writer, he was very diverse in terms of his writing, criticism. So he, writers back in the 1700s weren't necessarily getting by in terms of money. He was one of the first that devoted himself, as far as I know, really to the writing profession, which is probably one of the reasons he was so prolific. He depended on that money.
He was famous in his own time, never made any money. Most writers, as Paul pointed out, who lived then didn't make much money from writing. And Poe's contemporaries like Washington Irving and Henry Longfellow, both of whom Poe despised, by the way, and thought were mediocre writers. And he famously accuses Longfellow of plagiarism. But Longfellow taught at Harvard and married into money. And Washington Irving was a statesman, a diplomat, and Poe was solely a writer. And there was several reasons. One was there was no copyright. So it was no copyright on American works. It was much cheaper for publishers just to import works from England, and where they didn't have to pay the copyright. It was really unfortunate. Poe was involved in it was a nationalist group. One of the founders, it's called the Young America Movement. One of the founders was John Sullivan, who coined the phrase "manifest destiny." But they were also involved in getting copyright for American works, so that they'd be paid for their labors.
Oh. We're learning things all the time here. This is great. We all are. Other comments, questions, anything on your mind? I feel like I'm holding class here. This is, my students, by the way.
So how long did the piece take for you to from beginning to completion?
Well, some of you are writers here, and the process is never easy. There's the writing, which is actually the easy part, for me at least. And the research, the writing, I'd say about 2 years in that whole process, writing, editing, and that process. What makes it difficult is the commercial end of it, as I'm sure some of you know here in this room.
Something's never changed.
Exactly, and I have long experience being rejected by some of the finest agents and publishers in the United States. So, you try to get an agent, you push that aside, then you try to get a publisher. And I don't know if Mike Losi is in on this Zoom that we're streaming that we're having here. And a whole bunch of folks around the States are with us now. But Michael has been just really a dream publisher, a small publisher up in Massachusetts. And I'm really a nuisance. I'm always saying, asking to do something before the publication. And he's been so very, very responsive. So, I lucked out on that one. But, people are right. It's not an easy process to go through the system these days, and yet, it's something we have to do. Right? Yeah.
I want to know, because you just read a snippet of the book, how your protagonist Poe fits into the larger narrative of the book, and also since he has these kind of crazy tendencies, has that similar maybe like feeling of real Edgar Allan Poe being misunderstood or something like that?
Misunderstood. I don't know if Poe is very misunderstood in this book.
Yeah.
He's very understood in this book.
Yeah.
And yet, hopefully, and I think in all good horror books or Gothic thrillers, there is a humanity even in the psychopathic killer. And I hope that does come through in this book, frankly. I was very aware of that. I'm glad you asked that question. So there are actually 3 major characters, and there's a linking, obviously. One is, in fact, a fellow by the name of P.J. Bones, who's an ex-cop who was kicked off the force for no reason of his own. He was kind of stamped a dirty cop, goes on to become a best-selling author. And his protagonist is, in fact, his doppelganger. It's someone who is him trying to find justice in the world. And he's frustrated because, he's an idealist at heart, but he faces the realities of being a former detective, and he understands the world. And he is, to a certain degree, a shadow of Edgar Allan Poe in his drinking and in his depression and all his backstory. And then comes into his life, amazingly, is the Irish beauty, as I call her. Of course, there must be one in one of these books. Clara Knox. And I won't give away too much. She's a little duplicitous, let me put it this way. But she is very involved, believing after she is under attack by Poe, she is one of the first victims, and she survives, to kind of enlist C.J. Bones on her side to try to find this mad killer. And without going into it even more deeply, there is this dance that takes place between these three personalities over the course of these pages that I think is pretty interesting. So they become involved in each other's lives. And there's actually a fourth overriding character, this ghost of Edgar Allan Poe, who clearly is a character of sorts within these pages. I think you got a glimpse of that, in this reading. Yeah.
Speaking of, this is kind of off topic, but speaking of hauntings, things Gothic. So Virginia dies here.
Yeah.
And they're so poor that she's buried in the landlord, who was the Valentine family plot.
Oh.
And they're razing the cemetery in the 1870s. And there's a legend, it's given credence by some historians, that an early Poe biographer, William Giles, picks up her bones and keeps them in his house for a number of years, and eventually brings them south to Baltimore, where all three, Edgar, Mariah, Clown, and Virginia, are buried together. So there you go for us.
And I thought I was going to be too graphic. Okay. You beat me, Roger.
It wasn't much, I don't think there was much left of her either.
Oh, you're still going on with this, aren't you? I'm trying to be kind. Actually.
I have nothing to sell, so.
If I really wanted to sell, I'll read you another page or two. Maybe that wouldn't do it.
Other questions?
Anyone else?
Everyone's so shy.
Yeah, it's as I mentioned earlier, to the folks who came over, it's really a treat being here. Roger, again, thank you.
Oh, no, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, there is. I think Poe is absolutely overhanging this. He's, I think, in the corner. Well, there he is, right in back, and he's looking down on us here. Has anyone here been our Poe readers in college, or what do you think of that? I mean, what's your feelings about it?
I mean, I grew up reading Poe. My aunt gave me a collection of his works when I was a young teenager, so it's just very, I would say comforting, just because it's been such a part of my life for so long.
Yeah.
And it really sparked a huge interest in reading for me when I was young.
Yeah, I think it really, a lot of young people, high school, especially, kind of gravitate. He speaks to them, right? Any other Poe readers here? Maybe the question is, well, are you a Poe reader?
Yeah, I have a collection of his works. I was actually going to ask where can we find your book?
Thank you for asking. We did not arrange this ahead of time, actually. Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's active to sell, I suppose. It's in hardcover. It's in softcover. It's coming out actually. It's on Kindle. It's actually coming out as an audiobook. So if you want to listen to it, actually, I should say this: the narrator is great. No. This fellow who actually reads the book. In fact, if you want to get a glimpse of it, go to themaddeningbook.com, themaddeningbook.com, or here's the promotion, I suppose. And there is a snippet, there's about 8-minute snippet from the very opening of the book you'll get complete flavor. It comes from the voice of Poe. So it's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, the usual suspects in terms of sellers. And yeah, so that's where it is. I can see through some of the sales, it's been, some folks have been buying the book as of before it's being launched on the 7th of February. And hopefully we'll get the word out. You know, that's part of the journey of the writer, just making people aware of it, you know, so we'll see how that goes.
What's the launch date again?
The launch date, let me see, I think I forget, no. It's it's February 7th. It's February 7th. It's
Got it.
coming up. You got it now, Sophie? You got it? Okay.
You have to realize there's some family.
Yeah. Yeah, the plants. It's in the audience.
Hey, Paul?
Oh,
Can you hear me, Paul?
First, the group, you know, what do you think accounts for his popularity? You know, this is 214th birthday. Wow, what, 150 years after, 160 years, whatever that time period is, 170 years after his death. Why do you think he still resonates? It's really a question I've thought about. And, there's been other writers in that genre, certainly over, others.
I think nobody is graphic
No,
as
I'm
like
sorry?
from this time period, nobody's been as graphic
As graphic.
especially in American literature.
Yeah, he, I actually, part of the same chapter, there's actually a longer section from his book, which I did not read because I didn't think it was necessary. But throughout the book, there are sections of his work that are quoted, and they are pretty graphic to say the least, even though they're very literary. You start thinking about it, wow. Yes.
Well, he had a great brand before there was branding. Just his image, look at the picture. It's just so mysterious and people. And I think that perpetuated his persona, his public persona,
Yeah.
to the point, just wanted to say, my recently deceased mother-in-law, who was 103,
Oh.
a few days before she died, started spontaneously reciting the Raven. Yeah, so this is in the minds of people, and he's really captured the mysteries, his persona.
Yeah, because he was like talking about the demarcation between life and death. And death has always been very, intriguing and captivating because that's where we lose consciousness. And he was always like this very thin demarcation between life and death.
Yeah.
And he used to present this graphic representation and very surreal imagery. And that was very new to the people because most of the classic poets were always talking about nature. And and there was nobody who was exploring into this genre so vividly.
And so many people in his life died when he was very young. His mother, his brother Henry also died from alcoholism. And his biographer says that the one uniting theme in all his works is not only people dying prematurely and being buried alive, but people coming back to life. And the biographer viewed this as a way for Poe to kind of keep those people that had died alive.
Exactly.
A mournful and never-ending remembrance.
Yeah, especially with women in his life.
Women.
Yeah.
I kind of allude to that here. In doing some of the research, there's references that the raven is a mythological creature that decides life and death.
Yeah. Get rid of
And
it.
so we've all read the Raven, perhaps. I didn't understand there's really a history even to that symbol, and I couldn't agree more. Can you think of an author who personifies his work? His image is everything about his work. I mean, there he is. I've been looking at his photographs, or a number of photographs, and I mentioned it in my reading. If you look at his eyes and just the demeanor of his face, you could see him thinking in those photographs, and you kind of wonder, what are those thoughts, right? Because he's not happy, in those photographs. Yeah.
I have a question. I read the book, so I won't get into it. You talk a lot about characterologically. I mean, he's obviously your Poe is a killer, serial killer, and yet he has an ethic, right? He has a certain kind of humanity. He has these boundaries and borders, like that he won't cross, even in his madness. And I just wonder, like, how that evolved and how when you were writing him to give him some kind of a way that people could relate to him or not like him, at least not think he was entirely vile. Yeah. And, you know, when you were writing that, like how that played into, you know, his own, your character.
Yeah, I think that's really the challenge, because unless there is some humanity in your killers, they become cardboard figures in some sort of way. You know, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you know, he's a sympathetic figure, right? And, you know, there's not a lot of sympathy given to Damon Aldrich, which is his real name, right? Goes by the name of Poe. But he evolves over the course of this book from being the psychotic killer to actually he has a relationship, you know, clear enough, that shows his sensitivity, his vulnerabilities, I should say, right? And he's a nurse of all things. I had to give him a profession, and that nurse actually becomes part of his character development. He's beloved at Bellevue Hospital. That's not Bellevue, I think it's one of the New York hospitals. Crazy, right? But that is part of his makeup, rather than having him, again, a stick figure madman who just goes out and does his bad things. So that clearly was part of my mindset. All three of these characters are damaged, right? And all three of these characters really are beyond points of really coming back to the real world. And the story kind of develops, you know, how are they going to escape the maddening? And frankly, it's a challenge. Yeah.
I believe we may have a question from the Zoom, if I'm
Thank you.
correct.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
So whoever that was, you can go ahead and speak. I didn't see it in the chat, but it seemed like someone was trying to speak.
They asked in the chat.
No, but they opened.
Yeah, Paul, it was Paul, it's Phil. I was can you hear me? No?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Oh, okay. I was curious, you spoke about how you evolved from Joel Steinberg to OJ to Poe. How does Bronxland fit in?
The easy answer, it doesn't. It's an interesting question. Where did Bronxland come from? My other novel really talks about my growing up. It's a fiction book, but very, very autobiographical in nature. Growing up on the streets of the Bronx, Grand Concourse, once known as the Champs-Élysées of the Bronx, right? And that's a kid coming to terms with his own adolescence and everything, and much, much different tone than certainly the Maddening, for sure. I think that's pretty evident. Where does the creative spirit move writers at any point in time? It's an excellent question, because I don't know, where does that come from? Where does that idea come from? The Bronxland was about 7 or 8 years in the making, not the writing of the book, but in thinking about one's life and then trying to make its way onto paper. That was obviously closer to my heart, because the thing about writing, which is really interesting, like if I'm boring you, please, sorry, is that it conjures up ideas. It's kind of like one idea leads into another idea, and when you're writing something autobiographical, you start remembering stuff that really escaped you. And then you start getting text messages and calls and all the digital communication from people who knew you when you were 13, 14 years old, quickly. The paper boy, when I was 13 years old, delivered to the paper to apartment 3A on 50 West Tremont Avenue. He wrote me on one of these sites, Paul, I delivered the paper to your apartment. You know, I won't give away my age quite yet, but it was a while ago. You know, and other folks from that time kind of came out and celebrated the book, celebrated our former relationship. So it's been an interesting, it was a side path,
Yeah.
certainly, in terms of the writing, and we'll see where it goes next. And once you kind of get the bug for it, you know, it's there. Well, okay, Steve.
One quick question, does the Maddening take place in present day, like today, or any decade of the century in particular?
Yeah, it's modern day, and a lot of the references are in New York bound, you know, mostly Manhattan. I use my own experience at NYU. So NYU and Washington Square Park is there, Central Park and Riverside and Upper West Side, where I spent many years.
Where Poe lived, when he first comes, he lives off Washington Square. And NYU raised one of his apartments when they were doing one of their breakneck expansions.
Yeah, they still recognize that the buildings that he's building, they still recognize that place at NYU.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, you know, 84th Street when it was the country, it was considered the country. And I think, you know, he spends quite a bit of time in Baltimore, where he eventually dies from very much that anecdote I mentioned, although even his own death is very, very controversial. How did Edgar Allan Poe really die? There's all sorts of stories behind that. Yeah. I guess, you know, any final thoughts? Listen, Roger, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
Very, very.
Be very careful. Single file, please.
I made the mistake of actually sitting in that chair when I came in. And that
Oh, don't
was.
say that on
Oh,
camera.
okay.
It's the last day on the job for me. Okay, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
make sure you sign in.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Wish you all the best for it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
What is publishing?
I'm sorry? Published called Dark Ink Publishers up in Massachusetts. Yeah, so.